Bridgeport, Connecticut apartment on the afternoon of April 6, 2023. A violent confrontation brought a young mother's life to a tragic end. Brianna McKoy, a 23-year-old woman with a vibrant future, found herself in a fatal argument with her ex-boyfriend, Derek Francis. The ordinary residential building, a place Brianna called home, transformed into the backdrop for a devastating act of domestic violence that would leave a family and a community in profound shock and mourning. Derek Francis, the 41-year-old father of Brianna's infant son, instigated the final, brutal chapter of their volatile relationship. Just weeks after Brianna made the courageous decision to end their partnership, Francis confronted her within the confines of her own home. The tense atmosphere that had defined their past interactions escalated with terrifying speed, culminating in an event that demonstrated the ultimate and most tragic form of power and control. A concerned neighbor's daily peace was shattered by the sounds of a fierce argument erupting from Brianna's apartment. The neighbor distinctly heard Brianna's voice, raised in fear and desperation as the dispute intensified. The argument was not a distant mumble, but a clear and alarming exchange that signaled the situation spiraling dangerously out of control, prompting the neighbor to listen with growing dread. The auditory evidence of the assault grew more explicit and horrifying. The neighbor heard Brianna's desperate pleas cut through the walls, her voice crying out, "Stop! Stop! Stop!" followed by the heart-wrenching words, "Don't hit me." These cries were not merely parts of a disagreement. They were the unmistakable sounds of a physical attack, a desperate appeal for mercy from a woman in imminent danger. Suddenly, the shouting ceased, replaced by a single, deafening bang that ripped through the apartment building. That solitary, explosive sound marked the horrifying climax of the assault. Derek Francis, in a final, irreversible act of violence, fired a gun. The bullet struck Brianna, silencing her pleas forever and inflicting the fatal wound that would end her life. In the chilling silence that followed the gunshot, the most innocent of victims remained. Brianna and Derek's 16-month-old son, Xander, was present in the room throughout the entire ordeal. The toddler witnessed the brutal murder of his mother at the hands of his own father, an unimaginable trauma that would inflict deep and lasting psychological wounds upon the young child. Immediately following the fatal shot, Derek Francis acted with swift self-preservation. He abandoned the woman he had just murdered and the son he had just traumatized, focusing solely on his own escape. Francis fled the apartment, leaving behind the devastating consequences of his actions as he began his attempt to evade the inevitable arrival of law enforcement. As he made his hasty exit from the building, Francis came face to face with the same neighbor who had overheard the entire tragic event unfold. The neighbor, unaware that Brianna was already dead, confronted him, stating, "You gotta stop beating on her." In a moment of chilling composure, Francis replied, "I know. I'm sorry, ma'am," before continuing his escape, his apology a hollow echo against the gravity of his crime. The neighbor, still deeply unsettled by the encounter, went to check on Brianna's well-being. It was then that she made the horrific discovery of Brianna's body, the violent reality of the situation becoming terrifyingly clear. Her immediate call to 911 officially set the wheels of justice in motion, transforming the private tragedy into a public case of murder and launching an urgent police investigation. Thus, the actual event concluded not just with a death, but with a series of profound and immediate consequences. Derek Francis became a fugitive, sparking a nationwide manhunt that would follow in the ensuing days. A young boy was left orphaned by his mother's murder and his father's crime, and the family of Brianna McKoy began a long and painful journey through a justice system they hoped would honor the memory of the bright, beloved woman so violently stolen from their lives. In the months leading up to her death, Brianna McKoy actively navigated a relationship with Derek Francis that family members unequivocally describe as volatile. Their shared life, centered around their infant son, Xander, concealed a turbulent reality. Brianna, a young mother at 23, found herself entangled with a man 18 years her senior, whose presence in her life created persistent conflict and fear, setting the stage for the eventual tragedy. Concerned family members and friends actively witnessed the recurring turmoil that defined the couple's interactions. They observed a destructive pattern of behavior and noted the emotional toll it took on the vibrant young woman. Her mother, Camille Prince, especially, maintained a close watch, her concern growing with each new sign of distress. These loved ones did not just passively see a bad relationship. They actively worried about the clear and present danger Brianna faced. The couple themselves engaged in a continuous cycle of conflict. Their arguments frequently disturbed the peace of their Bridgeport home, creating an environment of instability. This was not a partnership with occasional disagreements. It was a connection marred by consistent and intense disputes. This history of volatility actively demonstrates that the final, fatal argument was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of a long-established pattern of hostility. On previous occasions, the nature of their domestic situation grew so severe that it demanded official intervention. Police officers actively responded to calls regarding domestic incidents at their shared residence. These official reports document a history of discord serious enough to involve law enforcement, confirming that the violence within the relationship had previously escalated to a point where outside help was necessary. These prior events served as critical warning signs of the potential for future harm. Just weeks before the fatal encounter, Brianna took a decisive and courageous step to change her circumstances. She actively ended her relationship with Derek Francis, seeking to liberate herself and her son from the toxic environment. This act of breaking up was not a passive separation, but a conscious and deliberate attempt to secure her safety and establish a peaceful life, demonstrating her desire to escape the cycle of conflict. Derek Francis, however, refused to accept Brianna's decision. He actively resisted the end of the relationship, a reaction that intensified the already dangerous situation. His inability to respect her choice to leave him created a period of heightened tension. This rejection of her autonomy underscored the power imbalance in their dynamic and foreshadowed his potential for future aggression. After the tragedy, Brianna's mother made a discovery that provided a chilling insight into her daughter's final days. Camille Prince actively found a to-do list that Brianna had recently written. This was not a simple list of daily errands. It was a document that revealed a young woman's desperate state of mind and her methodical planning for self-preservation in the face of a perceived threat. The most haunting entry on that list declared Brianna's intention to get a gun permit. She actively wrote down this objective as a necessary task, a step she felt compelled to take. This single line on a piece of paper speaks volumes about her level of fear. It transforms the abstract nature of their volatile relationship into a tangible, terrifying reality where Brianna felt she needed the means to defend her life with lethal force. Brianna's plan to acquire a firearm directly communicated her fear of Derek Francis. She did not seek a weapon for any other reason than to protect herself from the man who had been her partner. This action shows that she actively identified him as a credible threat to her life and was exploring the most serious means of guaranteeing her own safety against his potential violence. Ultimately, this backdrop of violence and fear actively shaped the final weeks of Brianna McKoy's life. The established history of domestic disputes, her brave decision to leave, Francis's refusal to accept it, and her desperate plan to arm herself all combined to create a powder keg. The relationship, marred by this escalating violence and control, did not simply end. It culminated in a preventable tragedy that her own actions and plans tragically failed to avert. On the afternoon of April 6, 2023, Derek Francis actively initiated the confrontation that would end Brianna McKoy's life. He arrived at her apartment on Vincelette Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut, bringing with him the unresolved anger from their recent breakup. His presence breached the safety of her home and set in motion the final, tragic sequence of events, turning a familiar space into a scene of unimaginable violence. Inside the apartment, Francis and McKoy engaged in a fierce and loud argument. Their voices escalated, creating a tense atmosphere that quickly signaled a dangerous turn. This was not a simple disagreement. It was an intense verbal clash that served as the prelude to physical violence. Both individuals actively participated in the heated dispute that echoed beyond their front door. A neighbor, going about her day, could not ignore the violent sounds emanating from the couple's apartment. She actively listened as the argument grew in intensity, her concern mounting with every shout. The thin walls allowed her to bear auditory witness to the escalating crisis, making her an unintentional but crucial observer of the unfolding tragedy. The neighbor's concern turned to alarm when she distinctly heard Brianna's voice cry out in desperation. She registered Brianna's clear and repeated pleas of, "Stop, stop, stop." These words were not part of a casual argument. They were the unmistakable sounds of a person actively resisting a physical advance and pleading for the aggression to cease. The situation deteriorated further as the neighbor then heard Brianna's next terrifying plea. Her voice cut through the air once more, this time with the words, "Don't hit me." This statement removed all ambiguity about the nature of the confrontation. It actively confirmed that Derek Francis had turned the verbal argument into a direct physical assault on the young mother. In a final, horrific act of violence, Derek Francis made a fatal choice. He escalated the assault to its ultimate conclusion when he produced a firearm. He actively aimed the weapon and fired a single, deafening shot. The bullet struck Brianna, silencing her pleas and instantly ending her life in a brutal display of lethal force. The most innocent person in the apartment tragically witnessed this entire horrific act. Brianna and Derek's 16-month-old son, Xander, was present in the room as his father murdered his mother. The young child watched the unspeakable event unfold, making him a silent, traumatized witness to a crime that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. Immediately after firing the fatal shot, Derek Francis focused solely on his own escape. He actively fled the apartment, abandoning Brianna's body and leaving his traumatized son behind. His hasty departure from the crime scene began his short-lived period as a fugitive from justice. As he exited the building, Francis came face to face with the neighbor who had overheard everything. She actively confronted him, stating, "You gotta stop beating on her." Displaying a chilling composure, Francis looked at her and calmly replied, "Yeah, I know. I'm sorry, ma'am," before he continued his flight from the scene. Driven by a deep sense of dread following the encounter, the neighbor made a courageous decision. She entered Brianna's apartment to check on her, where she discovered the tragic outcome of the assault. The neighbor found Brianna's lifeless body and immediately called 911, an action which officially reported the murder and triggered the full response of law enforcement. Immediately following the murder of Brianna McKoy, Derek Francis actively initiated his desperate bid for freedom. He fled the city of Bridgeport and deliberately crossed state lines, transforming himself from a local murder suspect into a federal fugitive. This calculated act of flight immediately widened the scope of the investigation and triggered a more extensive and complicated search operation. In Bridgeport, police detectives wasted no time. They actively processed the crime scene on Vincelette Street, gathered crucial evidence, and took the neighbor's eyewitness statement. Based on this overwhelming initial evidence, investigators secured an arrest warrant, officially naming Derek Francis as the man who murdered Brianna McKoy and authorizing law enforcement to take him into custody. Recognizing that Francis had absconded from the state, the Bridgeport Police Department actively sought federal assistance. They formally requested the intervention of the U.S. Marshal Service, an agency specializing in tracking and apprehending fugitives who cross state lines. This collaboration immediately elevated the search to a national level, bringing significant federal resources to bear on the case. The U.S. Marshal Service accepted the case and immediately launched a nationwide manhunt. Specialized fugitive task forces across the country actively received the case file and began coordinating their efforts. They disseminated Francis's photograph, physical description, and the details of his violent crime, effectively placing him on a national most wanted list among law enforcement agencies. Investigators from multiple agencies worked tirelessly to uncover Francis's whereabouts. They actively pursued every lead, analyzed digital evidence, and interviewed potential associates who might have knowledge of his escape plan. This meticulous investigative work involved piecing together a complex puzzle of his movements in the critical hours and days after he fled Connecticut. For 11 days, Derek Francis successfully evaded the authorities. He moved covertly, likely relying on a network of contacts or his own resources to remain hidden from the widening dragnet. During this time, law enforcement actively intensified their search. feeling the pressure to capture the armed and dangerous fugitive before he could potentially harm anyone else. The relentless work of the investigators eventually yielded a critical breakthrough. Federal agents developed credible intelligence that pinpointed Francis's location to the state of Ohio. The nationwide search immediately narrowed its focus, and the U.S. Marshals Southern Ohio Fugitive Apprehension Strike Team, SOFOST, took the lead on the final phase of the manhunt. On April 17, 2023, the highly trained members of SOFOST prepared to end the search. The team actively strategized and executed a plan to apprehend Francis with minimal risk to the public and to the officers themselves. Their expertise in capturing violent offenders was now fully concentrated on bringing Francis into custody. The federal agents located and cornered Derek Francis in Ohio. The specialized strike team conducted an operation that resulted in a successful capture, bringing the tense, 11-day nationwide manhunt to a decisive conclusion. They took the fugitive into custody without major incident, ending his flight from justice. Following his capture, authorities immediately transported Francis to a secure holding facility in Ohio. He faced the legal charge of being a fugitive from justice and began the formal extradition process. Francis initially resisted his return to Connecticut, but the law mandated his transfer back to the state, where he would finally stand trial and answer for the murder of Brianna McKoy. Justice for Brianna meticulously details the legal proceedings that unfolded following the apprehension of Derek Francis. The narrative shifts from the immediate aftermath of the tragic event to the formal pursuit of accountability within the justice system. This chapter centers around the courtroom drama and the emotional turmoil experienced by Brianna McKoy's family as they sought closure and the conviction of the man responsible for her death. This process commences with Francis's arraignment, a pivotal moment where Brianna's grieving mother, Camille Prince, confronted her daughter's alleged killer. Overwhelmed by the profound loss and righteous anger, Camille Prince audibly expressed her anguish and condemnation towards Francis in the courtroom. Her raw emotional outburst, captured in the outline as yelling "murderer, demon," underscored the deep pain and sense of injustice felt by the McKoy family. Subsequently, the narrative progresses to the trial phase, where the legal teams presented their respective cases before a 3-judge panel. The prosecution diligently constructed a compelling argument, relying on crucial evidence, such as the neighbor's testimony. This testimony provided a chilling account of the events leading up to Brianna's murder, including the desperate pleas for help and the subsequent encounter with Francis fleeing the scene. In contrast, Derek Francis's defense attorney attempted to mitigate his client's culpability by presenting the argument that the murder was a crime of passion. This legal strategy suggests an attempt to portray the act as impulsive and driven by intense emotions, rather than premeditated malice. However, the outline implies that the prosecution's evidence proved more persuasive to the panel of judges. Ultimately, after considering the presented evidence and legal arguments, the 3-judge panel reached a verdict. They convicted Derek Francis of the murder of Brianna McKoy. This conviction marked a significant step in the pursuit of justice for Brianna and acknowledged the gravity of the crime committed against her. The verdict provided a sense of validation for the McKoy family's long and arduous journey through the legal system. Following the conviction, the chapter culminates with the sentencing of Derek Francis. The court imposed a sentence of 55 years in prison. This substantial sentence effectively means that Francis will likely spend the remainder of his life incarcerated, a consequence fitting the severity of his crime and the irreparable harm he inflicted on Brianna McKoy's family and young son. The outline emphasizes the profound impact of these legal proceedings, not just on Francis, but also on Brianna's family. The courtroom became a stage for their grief and a platform for their unwavering pursuit of justice. The emotional weight of the trial and the finality of the sentence offered a measure of closure, though it could never fully alleviate the pain of their loss. The justice further highlights the powerful quotes that emerged from the trial and the family's reaction to the verdict. These quotes likely encapsulated the intense emotions, the pursuit of truth, and the ultimate sense of relief and satisfaction that justice, in its legal form, had been served for Brianna McKoy. In essence, it vividly portrays the legal mechanisms at work in holding an individual accountable for a violent crime. It showcases the roles of the prosecution, the defense, the judiciary, and the profound emotional involvement of the victim's family in the quest for justice. The conviction and sentencing of Derek Francis represent the legal system's response to the tragic loss of Brianna McKoy's life. The event of the court details the outcome of the legal battle. While it acknowledges the significance of this legal victory, it also sets the stage for the subsequent chapter, which explores the enduring emotional scars left by this tragedy on Brianna's family, particularly her young son, Xander. The process shifts the focus from the legal proceedings to the lasting emotional impact of Brianna McKoy's murder on her family, particularly her young son, Xander. While the justice system delivered a verdict and a sentence, this chapter underscores the reality that the emotional wounds inflicted by such a brutal act of violence persist long after the courtroom proceedings conclude. The narrative delves into the deep and continuing pain experienced by those left behind. This immediately highlights the profound and ongoing grief that engulfs Camille Prince, Brianna's mother, and the rest of her family. The loss of a child under such horrific circumstances leaves an indelible mark, and the outline pointedly points to the enduring nature of this pain. It suggests that despite the legal closure, the emotional healing process for Brianna's loved ones is a lifelong journey filled with sorrow and remembrance. A particularly heart-wrenching revelation within this chapter concerns the impact of witnessing his mother's murder on Brianna's 16-month-old son, Xander. The outline reports the devastating detail that, since that traumatic event, young Xander has not spoken a single word. This silence speaks volumes about the profound psychological damage inflicted upon the child, who was forced to witness an act of unspeakable violence against his own mother. Recognizing the severity of Xander's trauma, the outline indicates that he is currently undergoing therapy. This crucial intervention aims to provide the young boy with the necessary support and tools to cope with the unimaginable horrors he witnessed. The path to healing for Xander will undoubtedly be long and challenging, requiring specialized care to help him process his experience and find a way to communicate and navigate the world after such a significant loss. Despite the overwhelming grief and trauma they have endured, Brianna's family has demonstrated remarkable resilience and a commitment to honoring her memory. The outline notes their ongoing efforts to advocate for Brianna and to raise awareness about the devastating consequences of domestic violence. Their desire to prevent similar tragedies from happening to others underscores the depth of their compassion and their determination to find meaning in their loss. It concludes by returning to a poignant image of Brianna McKoy herself, a photograph depicting her smiling and full of life. This deliberate placement serves as a powerful reminder of the vibrant young woman whose life was tragically cut short. It contrasts sharply with the darkness of her final moments and the enduring pain of her absence, emphasizing the immense loss experienced by her family and community. The narrative effectively underscores the human cost of domestic violence that extends far beyond the immediate victim. It highlights the long-lasting emotional and psychological scars that are left on families, particularly vulnerable children, who are exposed to such traumatic events. Xander's inability to speak serves as a stark and heartbreaking testament to the profound impact of violence on young minds. Brianna's family's advocacy efforts also draw attention to the broader societal issue of domestic violence. By sharing their story and working to raise awareness, they aim to empower others to recognize the signs of abuse and to seek help before it escalates to such tragic ends. Their actions transform their personal tragedy into a catalyst for positive change and support for other victims and their families. In essence, Brianna's story serves as a somber reflection on the lasting aftermath of violence. It emphasizes that while the legal system can provide a form of justice, it cannot fully erase the emotional wounds left behind. The focus on Xander's silent trauma and the family's ongoing grief powerfully illustrates the enduring human impact of such tragic events. Ultimately, this reinforces the message that Brianna McKoy's story is not just about a single act of violence, but about the far-reaching and long-lasting consequences for those who loved her. It serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of addressing domestic violence and providing support for its victims and their families, long after the immediate crisis has passed. Beyond the immediate tragedy and the subsequent legal proceedings, Brianna McKoy's story serves as a stark and painful illustration of the pervasive issue of domestic violence within communities. The details revealed particularly the profound trauma experienced by her young son, underscore the devastating ripple effects that such violence has on families and loved ones. Creating widespread awareness about the signs, dangers, and consequences of domestic abuse is crucial in preventing similar tragedies. By recognizing the red flags in potentially volatile relationships and understanding the resources available to those in need, individuals can play a vital role in fostering safer environments for themselves and others. Furthermore, the ongoing grief and advocacy efforts of Brianna's family highlight the importance of providing long-term support for victims and their families. This story emphasizes that the emotional scars of violence can endure for a lifetime, underscoring the need for accessible mental health services, support networks, and community programs dedicated to healing and recovery. Raising awareness extends to acknowledging the silent suffering of children who witness domestic violence, like Xander, and ensuring that they receive the specialized care required to overcome their trauma and build a healthier future. In light of Brianna McKoy's tragic story, it is imperative to move beyond awareness and actively engage in creating change. This necessitates a collective call to action at individual, community, and societal levels. Individuals can educate themselves and others about domestic violence, challenge harmful societal norms that perpetuate abuse, and offer support to those they suspect are in danger. Communities can invest in local resources such as shelters, counseling services, and awareness campaigns. On a broader scale, advocating for stronger legislation and policies aimed at preventing domestic violence and protecting victims is essential. By taking proactive steps and working together, we can strive to create a society where tragedies like Brianna McKoy's become far less frequent, and where individuals in abusive situations know they are not alone and that help is available.